Alright guys, today I'm working on a 2010 Honda Accord, and this Accord has the 3.5 liter V6 engine, and I'm going to be doing a timing belt job on this car. So my customer just bought it. The car has a little over 200,000 miles. He doesn't know if the timing belt has ever been done at all. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do the timing belt kit with the water pump, all the pulleys, idlers, tensioners, everything. So in this video, I'm not going to waste a lot of y'all's time with extra stuff. I'm just going to get straight into it. I'm going to show you every step of how to do this job. So at least in my area, most shops are charging between like $1,200 to $1,500 to do this job. So I'm going to show you guys every step. That way, if y'all want to tackle this yourself, you'll be able to learn what you need to do to get it done. Let's get started. So step one on this timing belt job, you're going to want to disconnect the battery. The reason why is because if you leave the battery connected, you take off the timing belt. If somebody doesn't know and they get in the car and try to crank it up, then you've just damaged the engine. So always disconnect the battery. That way you don't have to risk anybody, you know, forgetting and getting in and trying to start the car in the middle of the job while the engine's taken apart. So step one, I went ahead and disconnected the battery. Next, I'm going to take off the serpentine belt. And so basically the way I do that is, so right there's a 19 millimeter nut. So I'm going to take my 19 millimeter ratcheting wrench, and basically you rotate it towards the windshield. To kind of go slowly. Thing's pretty hard. Okay, got tension relieved, and go ahead and pop the belt off, and then let the tensioner go, and that's it. So now we just gotta snake the belt out. All right, so the belt is out. Now I got the belt off. What I want to do next is, this isn't absolutely necessary, but I like to do it. I like to take off the power steering pulley. It just gives you a little bit more room to get down there. So I use this gear holder. So with this tool, I can basically hold the pulley and then I can remove it. So basically I set it up like that. I have the tool in the pulley, and then I have a 19 millimeter wrench on there, and then with that I can break it loose. Okay, well the pulley is loose, but I'm realizing now that it won't come off because it hits against this motor mount bracket. So let me, you can kind of see it hitting right there. So anyway, let me get that off. Let's get the motor mount bracket off real quick, and then I'll be able to get this pulley off. So I'm going to take a floor jack with a block of wood, and I'm going to put it right underneath the oil pan and put a little bit of pressure up on the engine. That way I can go ahead and undo this motor mount bracket, and the engine's not going to fall down. So I have the weight of the engine supported now. So what I'm going to do is this ground wire, this 10 millimeter, I'm going to undo that. So now this nut right here where the bracket attaches to the motor mount, that's a 17. And then these two bolts up here on top are 14. So I'm going to take off the 17 first, and then I'll take off the 14s. I think I called it a nut a second ago, but it's actually a bolt. Okay, now this pulley should come off. There we go. All right, so now before I can get these covers off, I gotta get the belt tensioner off. There's a 10 millimeter bolt that's like kind of behind this pulley and you can't really get to, so you gotta get this belt tensioner off. So there's just two bolts. Depending on your year, exact year and model, the way you get this tensioner off will vary a little bit, but I'll show you guys how I'm gonna do it on this one. So next thing is I'm gonna have to get the wheel off. And then once you get the wheel off, there's this dumb little cover you gotta take off. There's just a little push pin here, and then there's one like right up in here. So just pull those off. And there's supposed to be like a whole nother section to this, but it obviously got ripped, so this thing's not really doing much. So just take a screwdriver or whatever you have, just pop those out. So once you get that little cover off, you can see on the auto tensioner, on this one there's a bolt here, And then on the actual hydraulic part, there's a little bolt right there. So it's just two that you got to take off to get this tensioner out. So the bolt that's there on that pulley, it's a 17. So once again, I'm going to use my ratcheting wrench right here, and I'm going to get that off. And somebody torqued this thing to like 500 foot-pounds. There we go. The actual torque for this, it's supposed to be 54 foot-pounds, so it's quite a bit actually. So once you get this one loose right here, then that whole pulley will be loose. And then there's a 12 right here that you got to get out. So here's my 12, and then this whole thing should just be able to slide out the bottom. So there it is. The only thing you want to be careful of is this guy right here. So on the back side of the tensioner, there is this little washer deal, and you have to have this on. That way the tensioner can basically actually tension. So if you forget this, you'll be in trouble. So make sure that this goes back on there. Make sure it doesn't get lost. Back up on top, we have room to actually start getting this cover off. So there are 5 10mm bolts that hold this cover on. So we're gonna pull those out right now. So I got all the bolts out now. I'm actually curious to take off this cover now and see the condition of the belt. Now on the cover there is a gasket that doesn't really do much other than just kind of keep dirt and stuff from getting in there. So try not to rip it if possible, because these little gaskets, you can just reuse them. It's no big deal. I'm gonna set this cover to the side for now. It looks pretty aged to me, so somebody probably did it around 100,000, you know, and it just, you know, we're sitting at 204,000 miles right now. So I'm thinking somebody probably did it at 100 and it just hasn't been done since then. So now on the cover that's on the back side, there are these wires right here that need to be kind of pulled out, and just kind of set them back behind there. And then there are 5 more 10s that you got to get out to get this other cover off. So I'm gonna go ahead and get those out now. And the 5th bolt for the cover is right there. Alright, so all the bolts are out for that top cover. Man, I kept seeing ants getting on my arm. There's ants all over this car. I was up underneath there and they were getting all over me. Golly. Anyway. Crazy. Let's get this cover off. Let's pull it straight out. Up on it. Pull it straight out that way. Oh, dang it. Trying to do this one-handed. So once again, gasket. I'll put that gasket on later. So now we got both covers off of the top. Okay, so now we need to get the bottom cover off, but in order to get the bottom cover off, we got to get the crank pulley off. Now this part can be a little tricky. What I'm gonna do to get this pulley off, you see how on the crank pulley, it's a like hexagonal shape, right? There is a special tool that you can get that is made to basically fit into that hex shape. It holds the crank pulley, and then you can put a socket on the crank bolt, which is a 19 millimeter, and then you can break it loose. I'm going to be using an air impact to take off the crank bolt, but I know that if you're doing this at home or whatever, you may not have air tools, so you're going to have to get the special tool to hold the crankshaft pulley in place. I'll try to link to that in the description. That way, if you guys don't have it, you can pick one up. Now with a regular 19 millimeter impact socket, I'm going to see if it will come off. If not, I'm going to use a weighted socket, but let's see if it comes off this way first. No, it does not come off. That's kind of what I figured. A lot of times, even if you use air tools, these crank bolts can be on there really, really tight. So what I'm actually going to do, so my regular 19 millimeter, no good, ditch it. This is what you want to use right here. This is a weighted socket. This will take it off, I guarantee you. So now let's try the weighted socket and see what happens. That's it. Comes off easy. So here's the crank bolt. And this is the weighted socket. The socket's heavy, and the weight of the socket, it transfers extra torque to the bolt to take it off. I'll post a link in the description for this as well. You can buy this on Amazon, but man, if you're doing these jobs, it's a lifesaver, I'll tell you. Okay, now the bolt's off, and the crank pulley's fairly loose already, so I should be able to just wiggle it back and forth and then slide it off of the shaft. The only thing you want to be careful of is there's a keyway right here in the crank. You see how it's loose? So you just don't want to lose that keyway, which you shouldn't have to worry about the keyway so much until you get inside this cover and get to where you can take off the sprocket inside there, but still just be careful of that it doesn't fall out. So once you get to this point, there's 7 more bolts that hold this lower timing cover on. There's 1 here on either corner. So 1, 2, there's 3, 4, 5, 1 right in the middle, and then 1 up here on this top right corner, and then right above the chain tensioner there's 1 more, so there's 7. So go ahead and get those out. All right, once you get these 7 bolts out like I've done here, then the cover should just pop right off. Might be stuck on there a little bit. Alright, so at this point we've got the covers off, and don't want to lose this right here, so I'm just going to set this piece aside. Yeah, definitely don't forget to put this back on. But here's the cover, here's the inside. Got a gasket all around it, and the gasket stayed in place. If the gasket's not there, check on the engine and just reuse it. Alright, so my next step is going to be to get this bracket off right here. So there are some 14 millimeter bolts. There's 1 here, and then there's 1 or 2 on the top. I think there's 2 on the top. But anyway, while I'm down here, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the 14 that's right here, and then we'll lower it down and get the ones that are on the top. Now this bolt here, once you get it loose, it's not going to come out all the way because it hits against the frame. So don't worry about it, just get it loose. Once you get all the bolts loose, you can pull it off without having to take the bolts all the way out. Alright, now up here on top, before removing the other 2 bolts, there's a little 10 millimeter bolt right here that holds this plastic It's some kind of a piece for the wiring harness, but anyway, just take a 10mm ratcheting wrench and undo that little bolt. Now there's a 14 here, and then the other 14 is up underneath here. So basically what you can do is take just a regular socket and a ratchet, and you should be able to get it in there. Might be loose. Alright, so the bolt's pretty loose now, so I'm just gonna get it all the way out here. Now this one will come all the way out, unlike the one on the bottom. Now it's just one last one to take off here. Take that bolt out. So here's the bracket. So the bolt that goes on the bottom is a little bit shorter than the other ones, but the other two on the top, they're the same length, so you don't have to worry about getting them confused. Alright, so at this point, all the covers are off, all the brackets are off, and we have perfect access to the timing belt, so we can get it off and change the pulleys and the water pump and everything. On these, I always wait till this step before I actually set it at top dead center and set the timing. I just think it's easier when it's completely disassembled. So basically what you want to do, you want to set the #1 piston at top dead center. Pay attention to the sprocket right here. There is a mark on this tooth right here. So that little triangle mark all the way on that bottom tooth right above the keyway. Now that is the mark that you want to basically line up with. You want to line it up with this little pointer right here, this little triangle right there. So just rotate the crankshaft clockwise until those two marks line up. So just take your crank bolt, screw it back in. Okay, now you see how those two triangles are both facing each other? The marks are both lined up. Now once you have those marks lined up on the bottom, what you want to do is come on the top, and the marks should be lined up, but just to make sure, you see how there's a little arrow, there's a little line right there on that tooth where my fingernail is. You want that mark to be lined up with this line right here back behind the belt. And now over here, this is toward the back side of the engine, and it's going to be the same thing on the front of the pulley. There's that notch or that mark, and it has to be lined up with the mark that's all the way in the back behind the belt. So if all that's lined up, then you're good, you're at top dead center, you're on time, and at that point you can go ahead and take the belt off. So just a few seconds ago, I said that the marks on the cam gears should be lined up. That's actually not entirely true. When I was doing this, I got lucky and they were, but if you're doing this and you get to this point, it's possible that when you look at the cam gears, the marks may be in the 6 o'clock position. And so if that's the case, what you'll need to do, rotate the crankshaft another full turn, and then at that point, the cam gears should be lined up. The reason why is because the crank spins twice as fast as the cams, or you could think of it that the cams spin half as fast as the crank. That's just the way a 4-stroke engine works. But anyway, I'll explain a little bit more on this later in the video when I'm actually installing the timing belt. Okay, so now we're back on the bottom, and in order to get the timing belt off, I'm going to undo the two 10mm bolts that hold the tensioner on. Now, once these bolts come loose, then the tension on the belt will be relieved and we'll be able to pull the belt off. Alright, so the old tensioner's off. Something to be aware of, a lot of times these tensioners, when they get old, there's a seal on the front that holds the hydraulic fluid in, and a lot of times these seals start leaking. You can see on this one, it's all wet because that front seal of the tensioner has started to leak. But anyway, two bolts on the thing are the same, so you don't have to worry about getting them confused. This 10mm here, and then this one here, you're gonna wanna take that off too. It's just a little support bracket. There. Okay, now the belt's loose. I should have actually taken this bracket off first before I took the tensioner off, but oh well, it doesn't matter too bad. Okay, so now the belt is actually loose. Take it off of the idler pulley, take it off of the front cam gear, take it off of the water pump, and take it off of the rear cam gear. And then pull out the timing belt. And I actually do still see it says Honda on the belt. It does say Honda on the belt, so I find it hard to believe at 204,000 miles that this is the original belt. But if it was done at 100,000, it probably would have been done at the dealer, I would say, for it to have a belt that says Honda. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take off this idler pulley because I'm gonna be replacing it. It's a 14mm bolt. And now, tensioner pulley, I'm gonna have to remove that now. Once again, it's 14mm. Notice how on the tensioner pulley you have the bolt, and then you also have on the engine side this little spacer sleeve. Now whatever you do, don't lose this. Without this, the tensioner won't be able to pivot. So you have the sleeve on the engine side, and then the bolt that goes through it holds it to the engine. Now as far as getting the water pump off, there's only 5 10mm bolts. If you actually take a look at the new water pump, this is the new one, you can get an idea. So there's basically 1, 2, 3 here, 4, 5. So there's 5 10mm bolts. These larger holes, the 2 on the top and the 1 here, they actually correspond to this bracket that we took off earlier, if you remember. Basically it's made to where it fits together like this. And then on the back of the water pump there are 2 pins, one here and one here, 2 dowel pins that it'll help you line the water pump up when you go to put it on. Obviously before taking off the water pump, put a drain pan underneath so you don't get coolant everywhere. We're gonna work on getting those 5 10mm bolts out. Now with all the bolts out, take a little screwdriver, stick it right there, and give it a little pry. And there it comes. Just gonna let it drain for a little while like that. Alright, it should be done draining now. Pop this guy off. thought I was about to get hit in the face. Old water pump and the seal. Now normally around where the water pump seal goes, I'll just kind of go with a little shop towel, just kind of clean it off, make sure there's no dirt or anything like that that's going to get in between the water pump and the engine, you know. So just kind of wipe everything with a rag, get it all clean. Now the parts I'm using to go back together, it's this Gates timing belt kit. There's the part number right there. And I've already opened it, obviously, so I could take out the water pump earlier. But anyway, everything's in there. Tensioner, all the pulleys and everything, they're all in here. Tensioner, idler pulley, tensioner pulley, everything that you could possibly want. And this little gasket's what I need right now because I'm gonna put the new water pump on. And in case you're wondering, the Gates timing belt kit, it comes with this little extra shim. A lot of people wondering what this is for. There is a paper included and you can pause to read, but it basically says that there are certain vehicles between 2005 and 2010 that were affected with this issue to where the idler pulley was too far back toward the engine, and so then the timing belt would rub on the little flange on the edge of the crank pulley gear, and so you had to put this little spacer shim behind the idler pulley in order to bring the belt out forward a little bit more to prevent it from chirping. I've actually never had to use one of these shims. 9 times out of 10, or even more than that, don't even worry about the shim, just toss it. Now, just a reminder, there are 2 dowel pins here, so you should be able to get it in place pretty easily. And please, please do not use any RTV silicone or any other type of sealer on here. Please don't do that. I've seen people do that before. It's not good. Now the dowel pins, there's one that goes here and there's one here, so as you can see, and the dowel pins come with the new water pump, but one of the old dowel pins got left behind, so we're gonna need to use some pliers and get it out. Okay, there. Now these 5 bolts, I looked up the torque spec and it's saying 8.7 foot-pounds. It's weird, right? But honestly, I don't torque these. I just use a 1/4 inch ratchet. I'll kind of show you what I do. So first, just use your finger and run down the bolt as much as you can, and do that on all 5 of them. Just do it by hand. Now, use the little 1/4 inch ratchet with the 10mm. And what I do is, so start where the bolts next to the dowel pins, start there. And then just slowly tighten them like this. Go a little bit on this one. Then come over to the one on the bottom. Do a little bit here on the bottom one. Back up to the top, kind of same thing. Okay. Now I feel like they're both starting to get pretty snug. So just leave it there and then work on the other ones. Get them the same way, kind of run them all the way down to where they're almost snug. All right, now I go back up here to this one up on the top. And I go about like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So anyway, that's kind of how I do it. I mean, I just go by feel. Get them snug, but don't tighten them too much, guys. Just get them fairly snug. And I promise you, you don't have to try to get up in here with a torque wrench. You really don't need to. And now we do still have a little bit of coolant residue, so I'm just gonna take some brake cleaner and just spray it all throughout here and just kind of clean all that stuff off there. There's a little bit of dirt and oil and stuff. Just get all that cleaned up. That way we don't get anything on the new timing belt. We don't want to get the new timing belt all dirty. And then I like to get up in here with some compressed air. Now, if you don't have any compressed air, don't worry about it. I mean, it's not mandatory, but I just like to get up in here and clean as much out as I can. So next, I'm gonna take the new idler pulley, put it on there. Now this idler pulley, once again, the torque spec is 33 foot-pounds, but really you don't need to torque it. Just get it tight with a wrench or a socket or whatever. You can get up in there. It's pretty much good. Once you run this bolt all the way down, it really doesn't turn a whole lot more. Now in this kit, it will come with a new tensioner pulley, and you just have to obviously reuse this bolt and the sleeve that I told you about earlier. You want to transfer that to the new pulley as well, and now you can go install it. You're basically sliding this onto the edge of the water pump right there. Alright, so get the bolt tightened down here. And now with this bolt, basically same thing as the idler pulley. You want to get it snug, you want to get it a little bit past snug, but you don't want to over tighten it. Take the 14. Good right there. Make sure when you're done tightening this bolt right here, make sure the tensioner pulley moves freely like this. If it doesn't move freely, then it's in a bind, and you're gonna want to probably loosen this bolt a little bit and try to free it up. Okay, so before I put the belt on, I just did want to give you guys a couple of little insights here. So I took the crank bolt out, obviously, because I want to be able to slide this gear off, because I want to show you something. If the keyway happens to fall out, this is the way that it goes right here. So the end that goes into the crankshaft, at the bottom of it, it's slanted. So you want that slanted part facing down, and it slides in like that. It's gonna be kind of hard to take this gear off without taking the keyway out. But in case the keyway happens to fall out on you guys and you're wondering which way it goes, that's how it goes. I'm actually gonna go ahead and take this gear off, and I'm just gonna clean it while I have it out, just because. Okay, so I got the crank sprocket and everything back on. So now let's get the timing belt on. Okay, now when you go to install the new timing belt, the order in which you put the belt, you want to start by putting it on the crank gear. Then from there, you run it up here to this idler pulley here. Then you run it up to the front cam gear, run it under the water pump, run it to the rear cam gear, and then you finally go down and you run it over the tensioner pulley. And that's the order that you want to route the belt. Now the actual timing belt itself, there are no marks on the belt. A lot of the Toyotas, there's marks on the timing belt, but on this there are none, but you don't need any, because as long as your marks on all the gears are lined up, then you're in good shape. So let me show you how I do this. Okay, once you get it on the crank gear, then you want to get it onto this idler pulley here. and then route it over here to the cam gear in the front. Okay, so basically make sure that you're fully seated on the idler pulley, and then pull as much of the tension out of the belt as you possibly can, and then slip it onto the gear, onto the cam gear. Wrap it all the way over. Like so. And the crank has not moved, it's still lined up, and the cam gear marks are lined up as well. And there's going to be a little bit of slack in the belt, that's fine, don't worry about that yet. Okay, next go ahead and route it underneath the water pump. Then come over to the rear cam gear, slide it on over here. Keep in mind that the belt's got to slide kind of underneath this little aluminum lip that's right here. If you're having trouble lining up some of the teeth, you can take a 17 and you can move this cam gear slightly. So I'm going to move it slightly clockwise to just get everything to kind of fit on there. I'm going to rotate it back slightly and just make sure the marks are lined up. Now just keep in mind the same way that this rear cam gear has this little aluminum lip, there's another one that's kind of down here on the back side of it, kind of like at the 9 o'clock position down there. So just make sure that you clear the belt underneath that little lip. And once you clear this cam gear right here, it should essentially be able to slide onto the tensioner pulley fairly easily. And if you guys are having any trouble getting the belt onto the tensioner pulley, then you may have to loosen that bolt. The bolt that's down there that has the little blue paint on it, you may have to loosen that up a bit, but in this case it slid on fine, so didn't have to worry about that. All right, so very important next step, then you want to come and make sure all your marks are still lined up. So as you can see, the crank gear, the marks are still lined up, the two little triangle pointers are still facing each other, so we're good down here. Now we're up at the top at the front cam gear, and our marks are still good right here. And if we come over to the rear, you can kind of see down there, the marks on the rear cam gear are lined up. So we are lined up all around. So now we're gonna come back to the bottom, and I'll actually take this opportunity to show you that other little aluminum lip I was talking about on the rear cam gear. Right here where I'm touching my screwdriver. So when you're installing the belt, you just have to be careful when you're installing the belt that you clear that little aluminum lip. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting it. You're going to have trouble putting it on, and you're not going to know why. And of course, the reason that we install the belt in the order that we did is because you want as much of the slack as possible to be on the tensioner side. So this is the new tensioner that comes in the kit. So once you install it, then and tighten the bolts, of course, you'll be able to pull this pin. And once you pull the pin, the plunger will come out and put tension against the tensioner pulley, and then your belt will be tight after that. Now these bolts here, I don't over tighten them either. Just get them fairly tight with the 1/4-inch ratchet, and then that's it. That's all you got to do. Don't go crazy on them. Okay, now before pulling the pin, just verify one more time that all your marks are on, which I have. They're good. And so now at this point, we want to go ahead and take the pin, pull it. It's going to be kind of tight, really tight actually. Man, I cannot get this stupid pin out. course, Gates, you're going to use this flimsy little coat hanger of an excuse for a pen instead of using something like this. Would have been way better, but whatever. See, if I would have had a pen that was like this, if I would have had a pen like this, it would have been so easy to pull out. It wouldn't have bent and make it impossible to take out. But man, please, if somebody from Gates is watching this, quit using these sorry little grenade pins. Use one like this, please. That way it'll be so much easier to get out. Okay, the next step is you don't want to start putting it back together until you rotate the engine several times by hand and make sure that your timing marks continue to align properly. So that's what we're going to do now. So I've got my 19mm socket on the crank bolt, and right now everything's in time, nothing has moved. So I'm going to rotate it clockwise, which is the direction that the engine would normally turn. So right here, I've made one full revolution of the crankshaft. Now for every one turn of the crankshaft, the cam gears only move half of a turn. So in other words, for the cam gears to make a full 360 revolution, you're gonna have to rotate the crankshaft 720 degrees or 2 full revolutions, if that makes sense. So right now I've rotated it one full revolution, 360 degrees on the crank. And if you come up here on the cam gears, the marks are not going to be lined up because the marks are at the bottom at the 6 o'clock position now on either gear. That one's hard to see, but the mark is down there at the 6 o'clock and the mark here is at the 6 o'clock. So in order to get the marks back up to the 12 o'clock position, we're going to need to do another 360 degree revolution of the crankshaft. Okay, so I've gone 2 full revolutions of the crankshaft and my marks down here are lined up. And let's see if my cam gears are still good here. So the mark here is still lined up. And over here, yep, we're still lined up here as well. So let's say you do all this, you rotate the engine by hand, and you have one or more of your marks are not lined up on the cam gears. What you're going to have to do is remove the tensioner and restart. Basically take the belt off and start again. And so when you remove the tensioner, obviously now the plunger is going to be in the extended position, so you're going to have to retract it using a vise. You just place the tensioner in a vise like this and then slowly close the vise and just keep going like this until the holes line up and you can stick the pen back in. Okay, once the plunger is retracted, you can see that the holes are lined up, and now we can put the pen through. And you see the pen is all the way through. Now we can loosen the vise. And now the tensioner will be ready to be installed again, and then you can restart the process, and then hopefully this time it'll be lined up right. Now before you go all back together with it, if you feel so inclined, you can actually put this piece back on. You can put the crank pulley back on. You can put the crank bolt back in. You can reconnect the battery. Now, just to be clear, you really only want to let it run like that for like 5 to 10 seconds, especially with no coolant in it. So you don't want to do any damage to the water pump or anything, but just for a few seconds, you guys can turn it on just to hear it run. That way you can feel better about it. So now I took the battery back off just in case. And also, whatever you do, do not try to crank it up like that if you don't have the crank pulley on there. That's very bad. If you do, then the whole timing belt could come off the front and then you'll really be in trouble. So the rest of it is basically reassembling in the reverse order of removal. So I'll go kind of quickly through it. So make sure the next thing you do is put this bracket on. Do not start putting on the covers because the cover sits on top of the bracket. So put this bracket on first and then do the covers. Now remember, on this bracket, leave the bottom bolt in because you won't be able to get it in once you have the bracket in place. So leave the bolt in the hole when you put it in. Now you're gonna wanna start all 3 of these bolts by hand before you fully tighten down either one of them. Once you get that bracket reinstalled and tighten down the 3 bolts, now you're good to get on the lower cover. Before you put on the lower cover, make sure the gasket here that goes all around the edge, and then make sure that the gasket right here in the middle are in place. Okay, once you get the lower cover in place, reinstall the 7 bolts, the 7 timing cover bolts, and then after that you're ready to get the crank pulley back on there. But just don't forget this little piece right here, guys. Make sure that that goes on there first and then put the pulley on. Oh, but before I put the pulley on, in case you guys are wondering, if you need to find top dead center before you have the cover off, you see this little triangle right here? That little triangle corresponds to this last little notch right here. So you see that there's 3 notches here in front, there's 1 in the back. So if you line up that triangle with that 1 notch in the back, then you're at top dead center. Alright, so I'm going to show you guys what I'm talking about with the marks on the cover. So basically it's kind of hard to see. Sometimes people will mark these notches with white paint on the paint pen, but either way, you can see right here the 3 notches in the front. So and this notch right at the tip of my fingernail is lined up with that triangle right here on the front of the timing cover. And so when those are lined up, then you can come over here and you can see that our timing marks here are lined up, and over here are also lined up. If they're not lined up on the cam gears, you'll have to make another full revolution on the crankshaft. But yeah, so if for some reason you need to find top dead center without taking the lower cover off, you can do it that way. I'm gonna go ahead and reinstall this 10mm bolt that's on top of the motor mount bracket. I'm gonna get the rear timing cover reinserted. Once you get this back cover installed and you get all 5 of the 10mm timing cover bolts in, then you're going to take the wiring harness and then reinsert it back into the cover like so. And now lastly, as far as the covers, we have the cover that goes in the front. So we're going to slide this back on there. And then of course, reinstall your 5 10mm timing cover bolts. All right, we're almost to the end, guys. We just got to get the tensioner back on and a couple other things. So once again, on the tensioner, make sure that this little washer is in place before you install it. Otherwise, you'll have issues. And just a reminder, when you install the tensioner, the main bolt goes through there, and then the small bolt on the hydraulic part goes right there. Okay, now I'm gonna get the power steering pulley reinstalled once again so I can get the belt on. Now I can finally put on the serpentine belt. Okay, I got a brand new serpentine belt installed. Next, we'll go ahead and reinstall this upper motor mount bracket. Now these two bolts on the brackets, just loosely install them by hand. And then at that point, what we're gonna have to do is take the larger bolt that actually goes through the mount. But we leave those other two bolts loose, that way this can actually have some give to it, so we can get this bolt here threaded in without any issues. Don't forget the ground wire here. Go ahead and put this cover back on. Battery cable. Okay, at this point I'm basically ready to put coolant in it and start it and let it run. But before I do that, I actually have to do a couple other things to this car. I'm changing the radiator condenser. The customer wants me to change the headlights and the grille and all that. So as soon as I finish all that, I will come back and we will finish it up by putting coolant in it and letting it run. At this point, I feel like I'm basically rebuilding the whole car. All right, so I've put about 2 gallons of coolant in this thing, and probably a little more than normally I would have had to because I changed the radiator as well. But anyway, I put about 2 gallons of coolant in this thing, and this is one reason I love this spill-free funnel. So now what I want to go do is turn the car on and get it going. So I'm gonna go ahead and start the car. Okay, and then on the temperature, I'm gonna put the heater. I'm gonna put it to max heat. Like so. And the reason you do that is just that way, because the system's out of coolant, there's no coolant in there, so you just want to put it on heat so you can get the coolant circulating everywhere, including the heater core. Try to get all the air bubbles out of the system while you let it run. So we're running now, and you see there's some air bubbles coming out. So you basically just want to let it run until it gets all the way to operating temperature, fully warmed up. And then after it's fully warmed up, shut it down. And then I usually let it cool down for a little while, you know, at least an hour or so. And then take the funnel off, put the cap on and go drive it. So at this point, we just gotta let it run, get all the air out. All right, so after it's been fully warmed up and all the air bubbles are out, I've shut it off, I've let it cool down. So now we're ready to remove the funnel, put the radiator cap on and drive it. And of course, double check the overflow tank and make sure that that's full. And of course, no timing belt job would be complete without installing the timing belt sticker that comes with the timing belt kit. Now, there's no hard and fast rule on where to put these stickers. I've seen them put everywhere from the air filter box to the front of the cover to wherever, but I normally like to put them right here on the hood. I just take a rag, clean the hood a little bit, and then put the sticker here, and I stick it there because It's out of the direct heat of the engine, less likely to get worn out and for the riding to come off of it. So I just like to stick it there. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys found this video helpful, just let me know in the comments. Thanks, and I'll see you on the next one.